The courtroom camera captured the exact moment when arrogance met its match. Karen Westfield, a 42-year-old woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a designer pantsuit that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," sat in the plaintiff's chair with the kind of smug confidence that could only come from someone who had never faced real consequences for their actions. Her manicured finger tapped impatiently on the armrest as she waited for Judge Judy to begin, completely unaware that the manila folder sitting on the judge's desk contained evidence so devastating it would destroy her entire case in less than 10 seconds. What happened in the next 17 minutes would become the most satisfying evidence reveal in courtroom television history, shared over 15 million times across every social media platform and turning Karen Westfield from a confident plaintiff into the most hated fraud artist in America. Before we dive into the spectacular destruction of the most entitled Karen ever caught on camera, make sure to smash that like button if you love watching people who think they're above the law get exactly what they deserve. Hit subscribe because trust me, what Judge Judy pulls out of that folder will be the most satisfying thing you see all week. The look on Karen's face when she realizes she's been caught is absolutely priceless, and you won't want to miss a single second of this epic takedown. Karen Westfield wasn't just another difficult person having a bad day. She was a professional predator who had turned filing lawsuits into a lucrative side business. Over the past 5 years, she had filed 23 separate lawsuits against small businesses in her community, always with the same playbook. She would visit a store or restaurant, create a scene, claim discrimination or terrible service, and then sue for emotional distress. Most of these small business owners, terrified of legal fees and bad publicity, would settle quickly for a few $1,000s just to make her go away. Karen had perfected the art of being just believable enough, just sympathetic enough, and just aggressive enough to make fighting back seem more expensive than paying up. She considered herself a genius, a woman who had figured out how to game the system and make easy money from people who were too afraid or too poor to challenge her lies. This morning, Karen had walked into Judge Judy's courtroom with the same swagger she'd carried into 23 previous legal battles. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, not because she had a legitimate case, but because she saw an opportunity for something even better than a quiet settlement. National television exposure. She imagined herself going viral as the brave woman who stood up to a discriminatory baker. She pictured the interview requests, the social media following, maybe even a book deal. She had posted on Facebook the night before, telling her friends she was about to teach a TV judge a lesson and get paid for it. Her confidence was absolutely unshakable because Karen Westfield had never, not once in 23 lawsuits, been caught in her lies. She had never faced a judge who bothered to dig deeper than her tearful testimony. She had never encountered someone who actually investigated her claims instead of just trying to make the case go away as quickly as possible. Sitting across from Karen in the defendant's chair was Marcus Chen, a 47-year-old baker who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Marcus had immigrated to America 15 years ago with nothing but a dream and a family recipe for the most amazing chocolate cake anyone had ever tasted. He had worked 3 jobs to save enough money to open his small bakery in a modest strip mall. For 12 years, his business had been his pride and joy. He employed 6 people from the neighborhood, knew all his regular customers by name, and had maintained a perfect 5-star rating across every review platform. His bakery was more than just a business. It was his contribution to the community, his version of the American dream, and the legacy he hoped to leave for his children. But all of that had been threatened the moment Karen Westfield walked through his door 47 days ago and decided he would be her next target. Marcus clutched a folder full of financial records, security footage transcripts, and character references from dozens of loyal customers. His hands trembled slightly as he glanced at Karen, who was busy checking her makeup in a compact mirror and smiling at the cameras. He had spent $7,000 on legal fees just to make it to this courtroom, money he didn't have, money he'd borrowed from his elderly parents who had been saving for their retirement. His wife had cried every night for the past month, terrified they would lose everything they'd built. His employees were worried about their jobs. His children had been bullied at school because Karen's false online reviews had painted their father as a racist monster. Everything Marcus had worked for hung in the balance, while Karen treated the whole proceeding like an audition for reality TV stardom. Judge Judy was reviewing her notes one final time, and neither Karen's arrogance nor Marcus's fear could have prepared them for what was about to unfold in America's most famous television courtroom. Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom tension like a surgical blade. "Ms. Westfield, you're suing Mr. Chen for $5,000. Tell me why I'm here." It was a simple question, the kind she had asked 10,000 times before, but experienced Judge Judy viewers knew that simplicity was deceptive. She was already studying Karen's body language, cataloging every micro-expression, every tell that separated honest plaintiffs from calculated liars. Karen, however, was too absorbed in her own performance to notice the trap being set. Karen took a deep theatrical breath and launched into her prepared statement with the passion of a soap opera actress. Your Honor, I have never been so humiliated and discriminated against in my entire life. On October 15th, I walked into Mr. Chen's bakery at approximately 6:30 in the evening because I wanted to buy a birthday cake for my elderly mother who was turning 75. It was supposed to be a special day, a celebration of her life, and I wanted to surprise her with something beautiful from a local business instead of just going to a chain store. She paused for effect, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she had conveniently prepared in her jacket pocket. But the moment I walked through that door, Mr. Chen looked at me with such hatred, such pure disgust, that I immediately felt uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it and proceeded to explain what kind of cake I wanted, something elegant and simple, nothing complicated. But he refused to help me. He claimed he was too busy, even though there were no other customers in the store. When I asked why he couldn't help me, he said, "People like you always cause problems and I don't want your business here." The courtroom audience murmured with concern, exactly as Karen had anticipated. She was hitting all the right emotional notes, playing the victim with practiced precision. Judge Judy's expression remained neutral, but her fingers had stopped tapping on her desk, a sign that something about this story wasn't sitting right with her. "Continue," she said simply, giving Karen just enough rope to hang herself with. Karen's voice grew more emotional, her words coming faster now as she built toward her climax. "I was shocked, Your Honor. I asked him what he meant by people like me, and he just stared at me with contempt and told me to leave his store immediately. I tried to reason with him, tried to explain that I just wanted to buy a cake for my mother's birthday, but he raised his voice and said if I didn't leave, he would call the police. I have never been treated so poorly in my entire life." The discrimination was obvious. The hatred in his eyes was unmistakable. I left that bakery in tears, had to explain to my mother why I showed up to her birthday party without a cake, and I've suffered severe emotional distress ever since. I can't sleep at night. I have anxiety attacks every time I think about what happened. $5,000 won't undo the trauma I experienced, but it's the principle that matters. People like Mr. Chen need to learn they can't treat customers this way. Judge Judy turned her attention to Marcus, whose face had gone pale during Karen's testimony. "Mr. Chen, what's your response to these allegations?" Marcus cleared his throat nervously, his accent becoming slightly thicker under stress as it always did when he was emotional. "Your Honor, none of that is true. None of it. Ms. Westfield did come to my bakery on October 15th, but nothing happened the way she described. She arrived at 7:56 in the evening. My bakery closes at 8 o'clock. I was cleaning up, preparing to close for the night, and I had already sent my employees home. When she came in, I greeted her politely and asked how I could help her. She said she wanted a custom birthday cake, something very specific with special decorations and writing. I explained that custom cakes require at least 24 hours notice because I have to prepare the decorations and ensure everything is perfect. I offered to make her cake for the next day, or I showed her the pre-made cakes I had available that she could purchase immediately. But she became very angry. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. "Define very angry, Mr. Chen." Marcus swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable recounting the experience. "She started yelling at me, saying I was lazy and incompetent. She said she knew I could make the cake right then if I wanted to, that I was just being difficult because I didn't like her. I remained calm and professional. I again explained that custom cakes simply cannot be made in 4 minutes, which is all the time I had before closing. I offered several alternatives, but she refused all of them. Then she took out her phone and started recording me without my permission, walking around my bakery filming everything and accusing me of discrimination. I asked her to please leave because we were closed, and that's when she became hostile. She said things to me, terrible things about where I come from, about my accent, about immigrants taking American jobs. I have it all on my security cameras, Your Honor. Every word, every moment." Karen's confident expression flickered for just a fraction of a second, so brief that anyone not watching closely would have missed it. But Judge Judy caught it, and a knowing look crossed her face. "Ms. Westfield, did you raise your voice in Mr. Chen's bakery?" Karen waved her hand dismissively. "I may have been upset, but that's because I was being discriminated against. Anyone would be emotional in that situation. And this ridiculous claim about security cameras, well, I didn't see any cameras, and even if they exist, they can't prove what was in his heart when he looked at me. They can't prove the discrimination I felt. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly. So you're saying that even if there is video footage, it won't matter because your feelings are what's important here? Karen sat up straighter, sensing what she believed was an opportunity to drive her point home. Exactly, Your Honor. Discrimination isn't always about what's said out loud. It's about the energy, the attitude, the way someone makes you feel. I know what I experienced, and no video can change that. Mr. Chen discriminated against me, and I have witnesses who will testify to his pattern of treating customers poorly. Judge Judy closed the file in front of her and fixed Karen with the stare that had made grown attorneys with themselves on national television. Ms. Westfield, let me make sure I understand your position. You're telling me that regardless of what any evidence shows, regardless of what any recording might capture, you want me to rule based solely on your feelings about what happened? Karen nodded emphatically, completely missing the trap. Yes, Your Honor. Because you can't prove what I felt. You can't prove the discrimination I experienced. You simply can't prove it. The words hung in the air like a death sentence Karen had just pronounced on herself. Judge Judy's slight smile was the last thing Karen saw before her world began to collapse. Ms. Westfield, you're absolutely right about one thing. I wasn't there on October 15th. I didn't see what happened with my own eyes. Karen's face lit up with premature victory, interpreting this as validation. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. However, before we continue, I have a simple question for you. Did you happen to notice the security cameras in Mr. Chen's bakery? The color drained from Karen's face so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug and let all her confidence pour out onto the courtroom floor. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The smug expression that had carried her through the first 10 minutes of the hearing vanished completely, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. I didn't see any cameras, she finally stammered, her voice losing the theatrical quality it had maintained throughout her testimony. But that doesn't matter because even if there are cameras, they can't show what was in his heart. They can't prove he wasn't discriminating against me. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, and anyone who had watched her show for more than 5 minutes knew exactly what that gesture meant. She had her prey cornered, and now she was going to take her time dismantling every lie, every manipulation, every calculated word that had come out of Karen's mouth. You're right that I can't read Mr. Chen's heart, Ms. Westfield. But I can read transcripts. I can review footage. And I can see patterns of behavior. So let me ask you again, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Is there anything about your testimony today that you would like to revise before we continue? It was a lifeline, a final opportunity for Karen to salvage even a shred of dignity by admitting she had exaggerated or misremembered. But Karen Westfield had spent 5 years lying successfully to judges, lawyers, and business owners. She had never been caught before, never been challenged with actual evidence, never faced someone who bothered to investigate beyond her tears and accusations. Her arrogance was too deeply ingrained to recognize the cliff edge she was standing on. No, Your Honor, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. I stand by every word I said. Mr. Chen discriminated against me, and nothing he shows you can prove otherwise. You simply can't prove what happened. Judge Judy's smile grew wider, and the audience collectively held their breath. Even Marcus, who had been slumped in his chair expecting the worst, sat up slightly straighter, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the courtroom atmosphere. Ms. Westfield, Judge Judy said slowly, savoring each word, you've used that phrase twice now. You can't prove it. You're betting everything on the idea that without perfect evidence, your word carries equal weight to Mr. Chen's word, and that your tears and your performance will be enough to win. Is that a fair assessment of your strategy? Karen nodded eagerly, still not understanding that she was being walked into a trap. Yes, exactly. It's his word against mine, and I'm the one who was victimized. I'm the one who suffered. My feelings and my experience should matter more than whatever convenient story he's prepared. She crossed her arms across her chest, the universal gesture of someone who believes they've made an unassailable point. The audience members were looking at each other with expressions that ranged from disbelief to anticipation. They could sense what was coming, even if Karen remained oblivious. Judge Judy reached for the manila folder that had been sitting on her desk throughout the entire proceeding. It was thick, bulging with documents, and as she opened it slowly, deliberately, the sound of paper rustling was the only noise in a completely silent courtroom. "Ms. Westfield, I want to thank you for being so confident in your position. It's going to make what happens next so much more satisfying." She pulled out the first document, holding it up so the cameras could capture it clearly. "This is a transcript from the security footage of Mr. Chen's bakery from October 15th. Mr. Chen doesn't just have cameras, Ms. Westfield. He has cameras with audio recording. High-definition audio that captured every single word spoken in his bakery that evening." Karen's face went from pale to completely ashen. Her hands, which had been resting confidently on the armrests, began to tremble visibly. That's an invasion of privacy," she managed to whisper, her voice cracking. "He can't just record people without their knowledge." Judge Judy's expression hardened. "Actually, Ms. Westfield, in this state, business owners are absolutely permitted to have security cameras with audio in their establishments. There are signs posted at the entrance of Mr. Chen's bakery informing customers that security systems are in operation. But let's not get distracted by your sudden concern about privacy laws. Let's talk about what these recordings show." Judge Judy began reading from the transcript, her voice clear and precise. October 15th, 7:56 p.m. A customer enters the bakery. Mr. Chen greets customers with, "Good evening, welcome to Chen's bakery. How can I help you tonight?" The customer responds, "I need a birthday cake right now." Mr. Chen replies, "I'd be happy to help you. We have several beautiful cakes already prepared, or I can take an order for a custom cake for tomorrow." Customer raises voice, "I don't want tomorrow. I want it now. What kind of bakery can't make a simple cake?" Judge Judy looked up from the transcript. "Does this sound familiar, Ms. Westfield?" Karen's mouth opened but no words came out. She looked desperately at the audience as if seeking support, but found only expressions of shock and disgust. That's out of context," she finally managed. "You're not reading it with the right tone." He was being condescending. Judge Judy held up her hand. "I'm not finished. Let me continue reading what you said next, Ms. Westfield. And I warn you, the language gets quite ugly." The judge's voice took on a harder edge as she read Karen's actual words from that evening. "You people come to this country and think you can treat Americans like garbage. You probably don't even have a real license to run this business. Go back to where you came from and stop taking jobs from real Americans." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Several audience members shook their heads in disgust. Marcus sat with his head bowed, reliving the humiliation he had felt that evening. Karen's friend, who had been sitting in the gallery, quietly gathered her purse and began edging toward the exit. "Your Honor, I was upset," Karen tried to explain, her voice now high-pitched and desperate. "I didn't mean those things. I was just frustrated. You can't use my words against me like that." Judge Judy's expression could have frozen fire. "I absolutely can use your words against you, Ms. Westfield. These are your words, captured clearly on audio, showing that you were the one who was hostile, discriminatory, and abusive. But we're not done yet. Not even close." She pulled out another document from the folder. "This is something I find particularly interesting, Ms. Westfield. After you left Mr. Chen's bakery that night, you went home and posted on your Facebook page. Do you remember what you posted?" Karen's eyes went wide with recognition and horror. She began shaking her head frantically. No, you can't bring my social media into this. That's private." Judge Judy's laugh was cold and merciless. "You posted it publicly, Ms. Westfield. Publicly. Where anyone in the world could read it. Let me share what you wrote with everyone here." Judge Judy adjusted her glasses and read from the printout. "Posted at 9:47 p.m. on October 15th, found another target. The Asian bakery owner probably won't even fight back. Going to make this one pay big. These immigrants are so easy because they're scared of lawyers. I'll have a check by next week." The courtroom exploded in chaos. Audience members were shouting. Marcus looked up with tears streaming down his face, finally understanding that someone believed him. Karen was desperately trying to speak over the noise. "That was a joke. I was joking with my friends. You can't take that seriously." Judge Judy slammed her hand on the desk, demanding silence. A joke, Ms. Westfield? Let me show you what else I found. She pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are records of 23 lawsuits you filed against small businesses in the past 5 years. 23. And would you like to know what I discovered when I reviewed all 23 cases? Karen was now openly crying, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. This isn't fair. You're not supposed to investigate like this. 17 of these 23 businesses were owned by immigrants or minorities, Judge Judy continued, her voice like steel. 17. You have a pattern, Ms. Westfield. You deliberately target vulnerable business owners, you create confrontations, you file lawsuits, and then you collect settlement checks when these frightened people decide it's easier to pay you than to fight. You're not a victim. You're a predator. Karen Westfield was no longer the confident woman who had strutted into the courtroom an hour earlier. She sat hunched in her chair, her designer outfit now looking like a costume she had no right to wear, her carefully applied makeup streaked across her face in muddy rivers of mascara and foundation. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table, and her voice came out in broken gasps between sobs. Please, Your Honor, I can explain all of this. You don't understand. Those other cases are completely different. This is about what Mr. Chen did to me, not about anything else. But Judge Judy was far from finished dismantling the lies that had sustained Karen's fraud operation for 5 years. Oh, but those other cases are entirely relevant, Ms. Westfield, Judge Judy continued, pulling out yet another document from her seemingly bottomless folder of evidence. Let me tell you what else I discovered when I actually bothered to investigate your claims, something that apparently none of the other judges or business owners took the time to do. You mentioned witnesses, didn't you? People who would corroborate your story about Mr. Chen's terrible behavior. Karen nodded weakly, hope flickering briefly in her eyes at the possibility of salvation. Yes, I have witnesses. They saw everything. Judge Judy's expression could have withered plants. I contacted your witnesses, Ms. Westfield. Both of them. Would you like to know what they told me? Karen's face went from red and blotchy to completely white. They told you what happened. They saw Mr. Chen discriminate against me. Judge Judy shook her head slowly, savoring the moment. Actually, Ms. Westfield, they told me something quite different. They told me that you paid them $50 each to come to court and lie on your behalf. $50. That's what you valued perjury at. But here's where your plan really fell apart. One of your witnesses, a woman named Sandra Martinez, felt so guilty about what you asked her to do that she came forward with text messages. Text messages where you explicitly told her exactly what to say, exactly how to act, exactly what lies to tell in this courtroom. The audience gasped collectively, and several people actually stood up to get a better look at Karen's face as this revelation landed. Karen tried to speak but only managed to produce a strangled choking sound. Her lawyer, a young man who looked like he desperately wished he had called in sick that morning, had his head in his hands. Judge Judy pulled out a stack of printed text messages and began reading them aloud. October 20th, you texted Sandra, remember, you need to say you saw the baker being rude to me. Say he raised his voice and looked angry. Make it sound racist but don't use that word exactly. Cry if you can. I'll give you $50 cash after court. Judge Judy looked up from the messages. Would you like me to continue, Ms. Westfield, or have you heard enough? Karen was now sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I'm sorry, she wailed, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom. I'm so sorry. I made mistakes. I was desperate for money. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Judge Judy's voice cut through Karen's tears like a knife through butter. You didn't mean to hurt anyone. Ms. Westfield, let me tell you about the people you hurt. Let me tell you about the real consequences of your actions. She gestured toward Marcus, who was sitting quietly in the defendant's chair, tears of relief finally streaming down his face. Mr. Chen has spent $7,000 in legal fees fighting your fraudulent lawsuit. $7,000 that he borrowed from his elderly parents who had been saving that money for their retirement. His business has suffered because you left fake one-star reviews across every platform you could find, calling him a racist and warning people to stay away. His children have been bullied at school because other kids heard their classmates' parents talking about the racist baker. His wife has developed stress-related health problems. His employees have been worried about losing their jobs. You didn't just file a frivolous lawsuit, Ms. Westfield. You tried to destroy an innocent man's entire life because you saw him as an easy target. The weight of Judge Judy's words seemed to physically crush Karen further into her chair. And it's not just Mr. Chen, Judge Judy continued relentlessly. I looked into some of your other victims. A Korean dry cleaner who paid you $3,000 to settle because he couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle and didn't speak English well enough to defend himself confidently. A Mexican restaurant owner who paid you $2,500 after you claimed you found a hair in your food, even though the security footage I subpoenaed showed you pulling a hair from your own head and placing it on your plate. An Indian grocery store owner who paid you $2,000 after you claimed you slipped on a wet floor that the footage clearly shows was completely dry. Should I continue, or are you beginning to understand the scope of your criminal behavior? Karen could no longer even attempt to defend herself. She sat defeated.